Giulio Cesare, named after Julius Caesar, was laid down at the Gio Ansaldo and Sea Shipyard in Genoa on June 24, 1910, launched on October 15, 1911, and completed on May 14, 1914. The Comte de Cavour class was developed to counter the French Courbet-class dreadnoughts, resulting in a design that was slower but more heavily armored than Italy's first dreadnought, Dante Alighieri. These ships measured 168.9 meters or 554 feet, 2 inches at the waterline and 176 meters or 577 feet, 5 inches overall. Their beam was 28 meters or 91 feet, 10 inches, with a draft of 9.3 meters or 30 feet, 6 inches. At normal load, the Comte de Cavour class ships displaced 23,458 tons, increasing to 25,489 tons at deep load. The crew comprised 31 officers and 969 enlisted personnel. The ships were equipped with 3 sets of Parsons steam turbines. 2 sets powered the outer propeller shafts and 1 powered the 2 inner shafts. Steam was generated by 24 Babcock and Wilcox boilers with half-burning fuel oil and the rest using both oil and coal, designed for a top speed of 22.5 knots. Giulio Cesare fell short during sea trials, achieving only 21.56 knots. The ships carried sufficient coal and oil for a range of 4,800 nautical miles at 10 knots. The Comte de Cavour class was armed with a main battery of 13 305mm Model 1909 guns, mounted in 5 centerline turrets. These included twin-gun turrets, super-firing over triple-gun turrets at the bow and stern, with a third triple turret positioned amidships. Their secondary armament comprised 18 120mm or 4.7 inches guns housed in casemates along the hull sides. To defend against torpedo boats, the ships carried 14 76.2mm or 3-inch guns, 13 of which could be mounted on turret tops or positioned in 30 alternative locations, including the forecastle and upper decks. Additionally, they featured 3 submerged 450mm or 17.7-inch torpedo tubes, 1 on each broadside and 1 at the stern. The Comte de Cavour class ships featured a full waterline armor belt with a maximum thickness of 250mm or 9.8 inches amidships, tapering to 130mm or 5.1 inches at the stern and 80mm or 3.1 inches at the bow. They had 2 armored decks. The main deck was 24mm or 0.94 inches thick on the flat, increasing to 40mm or 1.6 inches on the slopes connecting it to the main belt. The second deck was 30mm or 1.2 inches thick. The gun turrets had 280mm or 11 inches thick frontal armor and 240mm or 9.4 inches sides. Barbette armor ranged from 130 to 230mm or 5.1 to 9.1 inches, while the forward conning tower walls were 280mm thick. During World War I, she served as a flagship in the southern Adriatic Sea but saw no combat and spent little time at sea. Admiral Paolo Thaon di Revel, Italy's naval chief of staff, believed Austro-Hungarian submarines and mine layers posed too great a threat in the narrow Adriatic waters. Concerned about the vulnerability of his capital ships, Revel implemented a blockade at the safer southern Adriatic using the battle fleet, while smaller vessels such as MAS torpedo boats raided Austro-Hungarian ships and facilities. The battleships were preserved to confront the Austro-Hungarian fleet if it sought a decisive engagement. After limited service in the First World War, Giulio Cesare made port visits to the Levant in 1919 and 1920. Both Giulio Cesare and Comte de Cavour supported Italian operations on Corfu in 1923 after an Italian general and his staff were murdered near the Greek-Albanian border. Benito Mussolini, seeking a pretext to seize Corfu, ordered Italian troops to occupy the island. Cesare became a gunnery training ship in 1928, having been in reserve since 1926. She was reconstructed at Cantieri del Tirreno in Genoa between 1933 and 1937. Both ships participated in a naval review for Adolf Hitler in the Bay of Naples in May 1938 and supported the invasion of Albania in May 1939. After the First World War, the number of 76.2 mm guns was reduced to 13, all positioned on the turret tops, while 6 new 76.2 mm anti-aircraft guns were added near the aft funnel. Additionally, 2 license-built 2-pounder 40 mm anti-aircraft guns were installed on the forecastle deck. Between 1925 and 1926, the foremast was replaced with a 4-legged tetrapodal mast relocated forward of the funnels. Rangefinders were upgraded, and the ships were modified to handle a Machi M18 seaplane, which was mounted on the amidships turret. Around the same time, one or both ships were equipped with a fixed aircraft catapult on the port side of the forecastle. Giulio Cesare underwent an extensive reconstruction from October 1933 to October 1937 at the Cantieri del Tirreno shipyard in Genoa. A new bow section was added, increasing her length by 10.31 meters or 33 feet 10 inches to 186.4 meters or 611 feet 7 inches, while her beam expanded to 28.6 meters or 93 feet 10 inches. Her draft at deep load grew to 10.42 meters or 34 feet 2 inches. These modifications increased her displacement to 26,560 tons at standard load and 29,600 tons at deep load. The crew size rose to 1,260 officers and enlisted men. 2 propeller shafts were removed and the turbines were replaced with 2 Beluso-geared steam turbines. 8 Yarrow boilers replaced the originals. During sea trials in December 1936, before reconstruction was fully completed, Giulio Cesare achieved a speed of 28.24 knots. In service, her top speed was about 27 knots with a range of 6,400 nautical miles at a cruising speed of 13 knots. The main guns were enlarged to 320 millimeters or 12.6 inches, and the central turret along with the torpedo tubes was removed. The entire secondary armament and anti-aircraft guns were replaced with 12 120mm guns in 6 twin turrets and 8 100mm or 4-inch anti-aircraft guns in twin mounts. Additionally, the ship was equipped with 12 Breda 37mm light anti-aircraft guns in 6 twin mounts and 12 13.2mm Breda M31 anti-aircraft machine guns, also in twin mounts. In 1940, the 13.2mm machine guns were replaced with 20mm anti-aircraft guns in twin mounts. In 1941, Giulio Cesare was equipped with 2 additional twin mounts and 4 more 37mm guns in twin mounts positioned on the forecastle between the 2 turrets. The tetrapodal mast was replaced by a new forward conning tower, protected by 260mm or 10.2-inch thick armor. A fire control director, fitted with 2 large stereo rangefinders with a base length of 7.2 meters or 23.6 feet, was installed atop the conning tower. During the reconstruction, the deck armor was increased to a total of 135 millimeters or 5.3 inches over the engine and boiler rooms and 166 millimeters or 6.5 inch over the magazines. However, its distribution across 3 decks made it less effective than a single plate of the same thickness. The armor on the barbettes was strengthened with additional 50mm or 2-inch plates. Altogether, this armor added a weight of 3,279 tons. The original underwater protection was replaced with the Poulies torpedo defense system, which used a large cylinder surrounded by fuel oil or water to absorb the impact of a torpedo blast. However, it lacks sufficient depth to effectively counter modern torpedoes. A significant issue with the reconstruction was that the increased draft caused the waterline armor belt to become nearly fully submerged under any substantial load. Early in the Second World War, Giulio Cesare participated in the Battle of Calabria, also known as the Battle of Punta Stilo, alongside Conte di Cavour on July 9, 1940 as part of the 1st Battle Squadron under Admiral Inigo Campioni. During the battle, she engaged key elements of the British Mediterranean Fleet. The British were escorting a convoy from Malta to Alexandria, while the Italians had just escorted one from Naples to Benghazi, Libya. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commanding the Mediterranean Fleet, attempted to position his ships between the Italians and their base at Taranto. The fleets spotted each other in the afternoon, and the battleships opened fire at 1553 from a distance of nearly 27,000 meters or 29,000 yards. The leading British battleships, HMS Warspite and Malaya, returned fire a minute later. By 1600, 3 minutes after opening fire, shells from Giulio Cesare began straddling Warspite, prompting the British battleship to make a slight turn and increase speed to disrupt the Italian ship's aim. Some of Giulio Cesare's rounds overshot Warspite and nearly hit the destroyers HMS Decoy and Hereward, scattering splinters that punctured their superstructures. Around the same time, a shell from Warspite struck Giulio Cesare at approximately 24,000 meters or 26,000 yards, piercing the rear funnel and exploding inside, creating a hole nearly 6.1 meters or 20 feet wide. Fragments ignited several fires, and the resulting smoke was pulled into the boiler rooms, forcing 4 boilers offline as their operators struggled to breathe. This reduced the ship's speed to 18 knots. Unsure of the extent of the damage, Admiral Campioni ordered his battleships to withdraw in the face of superior British forces successfully disengaging. Repairs to Giulio Cesare were completed by late August, and both ships attempted, without success, to intercept British convoys to Malta in August and September. On the night of November 11, 1940, Giulio Cesare and other Italian battleships were anchored in Taranto harbor when 21 Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers from the British aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious, supported by additional warships, launched an attack. One torpedo sank Conte di Cavour in shallow water, but Giulio Cesare remained unscathed. She took part in the Battle of Cape Spartivento on November 27, 1940, but never closed within range to engage any British ships. In January 1941, the ship sustained damage from splinters caused by a near miss during a Royal Air Force air raid on Naples by Vickers Wellington bombers. Repairs were completed in Genoa by early February. On the 8th of February, she sailed to the Straits of Bonifacio to intercept what the Italians believed to be a Malta convoy, which turned out to be a raid on Genoa. She failed to encounter any British forces. On December 17, 1941, she participated in the First Battle of Sirte, offering distant cover for a convoy heading to Libya and briefly engaging the escort force of a British convoy. In early January 1942, she again provided distant cover for another convoy bound for North Africa. Giulio Cesare was reduced to a training ship at Taranto and later Pola. Following Italy's surrender on September 8, 1943, she sailed to Taranto, quelling a mutiny and surviving an ineffective attack by 5 German aircraft during the journey. She then proceeded to Malta, arriving on September 12, where she was interned. The ship remained in Malta until June 17, 1944, after which she returned to Taranto, staying there for the next 4 years. After the war, Giulio Cesare was allocated to the Soviet Union as part of war reparations. She was moved to Augusta, Sicily on December 9, 1948, where a sabotage attempt failed. Stricken from the Naval Register on December 15, she was handed over to the Soviets on February 6, 1949, under the temporary designation Z-11 in Vlore, Albania. Renamed Novorossiysk after the Soviet Black Sea city, she served as a training ship and underwent 8 refits. In 1953, all Italian light anti-aircraft guns were replaced with 1837 mm 70K anti-aircraft guns in 6 twin and 6 single mounts. Her fire control systems and radars were also upgraded. This rearmament was intended to be temporary, as the Soviets planned to replace her 120 mm secondary mounts with the 130 mm 58 SM-2 under development and swap the 100 mm and 37 mm guns for 8 quadruple 45 mm mounts. While anchored in Sevastopol on the night of the 28th-29th October 1955, an explosion tore a 4x14 meter or 3x46 foot hole in the forecastle ahead of a turret. Flooding quickly became uncontrollable, and she capsized, resulting in the loss of 617 men, including 61 who had come from other ships to assist. The exact cause of the explosion remains uncertain. The official explanation, widely considered the most likely, attributes it to a magnetic RMH or LMB bottom mine laid by the Germans during World War II, triggered when the battleship's anchor chain dragged before her final mooring. Subsequent searches discovered 32 such mines, with some located as close as 50 meters or 160 feet from the blast site. The damage corresponded to an explosion of 1,000 to 1,200 kilograms or 2,200 to 2,600 pounds of TNT, potentially from multiple mines. Alternative theories for the ship's loss have been suggested, the most popular being sabotage by Italian frogmen from the wartime Decima MAS unit. Over a decade after the war, they may have targeted the ship either to avenge its transfer to the USSR or on behalf of NATO. Novorossiysk was removed from the Naval Register on February 24, 1956, salvaged on May 4, 1957, and later scrapped.